Okay, hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are at. My name is Prasanna. With Painfully Foundation, we have an opportunity to speak with one of the French authors, Ari Gautier. Uh, the talk will be moderated by Dr. Suraj Yangde. Uh, the structure of the talk is going to be as follows. We will start with Ari's introduction. Context setting will be done by Dr. Suraj Yangde. Ari will go ahead with his presentation for around 35 to 40 minutes, and the rest we will leave 15 to 20 minutes for our Q&A. The questions can be put in chat or you can raise your hands at the very end, and I think we will go from there. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get started. So today we have with us Ari Gautier. He is a French writer and a poet of Indo-Malagasy origin, dedicated to giving Pondicherry its rightful place on the French literary map. Ari is committed to increasing Indian Francophone literature's visibility in the world. Carnet's Secret de Lakshmi and the Thinnai are his two first works on the history of the city where he spent his childhood. His most recent publication is Nocturne Pondicherry, a collection of short stories on post colonial Pondicherry. He currently lives in Oslo. I'll now pass it on to Suraj to set the context, add something, and then we can move from there.
Thank you so very much, Prasanna, for setting the stage. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We are recording this session. Please feel free, as Prasanna has advised logistically, put your questions. It will be an exciting conversation because this is the topic that I've never thought of will even exist about the Dalit history within the Francophone world. And to educate us, and as many of you are here, was no other person who is better suited than Ari Gautier. Ari is not just a novelist, but also a very powerful poet. And in fact, in his own renditions, the way we are educated, and I've read his work and got inspired early on. And thanks to his contribution that he is trying to bring to the Dalit history, the geographical location, the literal sites that we convey through Indian Oceanic and expanding horizons. And that the French element is very crucial. We just don't know that a word like Dalit would exist in the internal history of France. Usually, people who studied Dalit word or Dalit history cast were French people, very notable people, Dumas being one of them, but also Delma and so forth. But they studied Dalit question as an external, as a Sanskrit, as a Hindu, as an Indian project, but not consider that also part of an internal making of French identity. And so for us to then come to this topic, we wanted to honor, we have started this distinguished lecture series to honor alive, prominent Dalit intellectuals, writers, poets. So they are recognized for their contribution to the field in the world of letters. Bama, as we know, is one of the most accomplished Tamil women writers, Dalit women writers, Indian women writers, whose autobiography Karku was steering, for those who have read, were also exposed how caste navigates through the Christendom, especially the Indian Brahminical society that has managed to interfere through the otherwise egalitarian principles promoted through an anti-caste virtues, which then gets co-opted through a Christian, Catholic, Protestant, so forth imaginations. And for us to give honor, recognize our elder Bama, and salute her for her incredible contribution and being the steadfast inspiration that she is for many of us. All of us look up to her and hope to stand on her shoulders and build on her legacy, her work, her contribution. And who else to talk on the topic and the virtues and the literature and the expansion of what we see, the Dalit worldview, is Ari Gautier. Ari, you are very welcome to this distinguished lecture. You are an inaugural distinguished lecture, a speaker for Bama. We are very excited. I was very intrigued when you posted on social media, liberté, and my pronunciation is not correct, equality and dalitality. Hey, I was like, that's the bank. So let's start With the background, Hari, floor is yours.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you so much. Thank you, Prasanna, for the introduction, and thank you, Suraj, for this lovely invitation. And of course, as you rightly said, the Francodalitalité is an unknown terrain that recently I've been talking to a friend, and as you know, I launched the first Dalit History Month in Scandinavia last March. And the first invitation was for you, but unfortunately you couldn't make it because you are so busy. And then we had Manjit Sarkar, who came as the first Dalit comedian, a stand up comedian. And to my surprise, the place was totally packed. There were more than 150 people who came for the Manjit Sarkar. And Manjit Sarkar is not known in this part of the world. But of course, we sent a couple of invitations. But I think more what I was more surprised that the commitment and the curiosity of the Norwegians, the Dalit cause. So it was a success. And at the same time, my friend in Paris, Gauri Satya, she wanted to have a Dalit History Month. But for some financial reasons and so, she couldn't make it. And we were talking about how to organize the next Dalit History Month. And she was surprised that when I told her that the event was successful and we have so many people. And she said, do you think we can get this amount of people in Paris or in France? I said, no. And she said, why? Because Dalit, uh, the Franco-Pondicherry Dalit, the Franco-Dalit is non-existent. What do you mean? I said, the Frenchness erased the Dalitalité. Because they became French, they are no more Dalit. She said, yeah, you're right, but there's also another reason, which is she was absolutely right. Because the word Dalit itself is foreign to us. In Pondicherry or in at my time, the word Dalit was not existing. We were called either pariahs, untouchables, or Harijan. So these were the three words. The Dalit word has not entered our consciousness. So when you go and you talk to a French Franco-Tamil living in Paris, who living in France, who is from Dalit background, for him Dalit is some other foreign word, and it doesn't apply to him. Which is she was absolutely right, because when I grew up, I never heard the word Dalit. We were referred as either pariah or untouchables. Point. End of the story. So when you talk about the identity as a Dalit, the Franco-Pondicherrians are still struggling to identify themselves as a Dalit because the word itself is foreign to them. But when we talk about the French Dalit history, that's what we're going to talk about, the unknown story of the French, we need to go back to the conversion time, the religious conversion, which has happened around 1685. The French, they came to Pondicherry in 1673, and the first missionaries who came along, the first colonizers, were Capuchin priests. But the Capuchin priests, they were only serving the Europeans, and they were not into a missionary, ambitions. Later on come the Jesuits around the 1680s. And then when the Jesuits came, they said, okay, our goal is to convert the local people, the Hindus into Christianity. And so what happened? Most of the people who converted into Christianity, of course, they were from the lower caste. But in under the if you call it like 100%, 20% also from the upper caste people who were attracted to a more egalitarian religion that Christianity was claiming to be. And so in Pondicherry, there is no the same structure and the like in Indian society as a Kshatriya, a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Shudra and everything, because in Pondicherry there's no Brahmanical tradition as such. So the Velas are where the Brahmin stays. So among the Velara community, 20% of the Velara community converted to Christianity because of the idea of egalitarian. But most of the people who converted into Christianity are the low caste people. And the low caste people, when they converted themselves into Christianity, they were under the idea that one day, from one day to another, everything will change and they will get a equal. They can get the equality, as we said, the equality in the society. But that didn't happen because the people who, even though the 20% Velasha who converted themselves into Christianity, they didn't want to give up their privilege. And uh, in the church, they built walls inside the church to have a segregation between the Velasha and the pariahs. So, for example, the Mission Street Church, which is in Pondicherry, on the main street, so there was a wall. There was a wall, the same church, little beyond the boulevards in Redyapalayam, there was a wall. Even in the cemetery, there was a wall where people uh, um, uh, were segregated. So that segregation shows how much, however you convert yourself to a new religion, you don't give up your privilege because they were still committed to have that caste system. And the French, they didn't want to interfere in the religious and caste structure because they needed the both. They needed the pariahs, they needed the Velasha at the same time. The Velasha being a little more educated, so they were used as to work in the French administration. But the pariahs, no, they were not given any education, so they were still under the same the same as they were before. So nothing has changed. Of course, there was a kind of resistance. They fought back, but it took a long time before those walls were destroyed. So you need to come from 1685 till the French Revolution to make a change. So for almost 200 years, those people was living as Christians, but still as pariah Christians. Like, for example, if you take as I said, the Mission Church in Mission Street, since there was a wall and the pariahs couldn't, the wall couldn't be destroyed. Even at one point, they were not allowing the pariahs to come inside the church. So what did the pariah did? They built their own church. Like, for example, the church which is in the north-south boulevard next to the railway station, it is called the pariah church. So they built their own church. So in order not to go into the Velasha church, which is on Mission Street. So they have to wait for 200 years for their status to change, for a new evolution in their life. So I'm going to read out from my book, The Tinai, which is my second novel, where I talk about how this renunciation happened. So on 3rd January 1882, my great-grandfather Nalanda presented himself at Pondicherry's newly built city hall. He was tired from the journey on foot from Ariangupam, but impressed by the stately building in front of him. Hesitant and anxious, he got in line behind many other people waiting to make an important decision. 200 years ago, one of his ancestors had converted to Catholicism to escape untouchability. Now, Nalanda was about to dive into another new world, seeking a better life for himself and his children. He would become a French citizen. An escape route from poverty had opened on 21st September 1881, when the French government passed its law of renunciation. The people waiting in line with Nalanda were excitedly discussing the issue, while two groups outside the line shouted at them, trying to influence their decision. The first was the lawyer Ponuthambi's clique. They encouraged renunciation. The second was the squadron of Shanmugam, the Black V11, the Machiavellian, the opponent of renunciation. The two men, in fact, were from the same caste of Velara, but Ponuthambi belonged to the city Velala, who worked in the colonial administration. They have converted to Catholicism and believed in the values of the French Republic. Shanmugam was one of the rich landowners who reigned in the villages. He was the head of the traditionalist Hindus who opposed everything foreign. Ponuthambi was the first Indian to renounce taking the name of Laporte. Shanmugam hated him. Nalanda couldn't afford to fight for an ideology. He wanted to give his family a better future. He was ready. What was he giving up? While shameful condition had been imposed on him, would it be a sacrifice to have a new name, one that didn't have any caste connotations? Didn't it make sense to pursue a better status, even if it was a foreign one? As he moved forward in the line, things gradually grew clearer. By the time he was facing the bureaucrat and the two witnesses, there was no shadow of a doubt. The devil take tradition. On his way back, his steps were more assured. He felt lighter. Centuries of objection and abomination had been erased by a bit of ink on his stump. He couldn't stop marveling at this magic. Pushing his stump on a sheet of paper had changed his destiny. But destiny and the French bureaucracy and had another round to play. In 1962, Charles de Gaulle ratified the recession of Pondicherry to the Republic of India. And the inhabitants related in panic. Those who have renounced didn't understand why they needed to choose French nationality again. In spite of the confusion, some 5,000 families managed to become French. So this is how they became French. And in order to understand, not only there's the French Revolution, but also there's the abolition of slavery. So when the abolition of slavery happened, the slaves needed new identity because they were free from the masters. They were subjects, not really citizens, but they were just subject of of a power. So, because as you know, the slaves always had the master's name as those and those. So for them, in order to have an identity, they need to have a new état civil, means a new name and a new surname, a new status. So copying that model, the French government at that moment, Eugène Cissé, his name actually, came with that idea. Why don't we expand the same liberté, égalité, fraternité slogan or the idea of this égalité to our colonies? So there were 3 colonies were choose to have those that new idea. It was Saint-Louis de Senegal, it was Algeria, it was Pondicherry. So in these 3 colonies, they were given the colonial subjects were given the choice to become French citizen if they renounced their native status. But of course, as you know, Algeria was totally Muslim, and I don't think any Algerian were ready to give up their religion. And Senegal, it was a little different because there was missionary was quite Catholicism was already existing, so it was more smooth. But Pondicherry was the most successful place under this scheme where so many people became French. By doing this, there are two ideas or 2 notions. First of all, you need to understand that the French people were hated by the Pondicherrian, by the upper caste Indian Pondicherrians, because they were called them Firengis, and they were close to untouchables. And even at a point, I think it exactly in 1753, in the diary of Ananda Ringapillai, he is noting that duplex is complaining as such. Though the Tamils have long lived with us, still they say against their customs and speak ill of us, comparing us in their brutal ignorance to pariahs. So duplex or the French people were equal to pariahs because they share the common pollution of eating meat, of drinking alcohol. So in that way, there's a kind of solidarity, natural solidarity, which has happened between the French people and the pariahs. And recently, you must have noticed more and more Tamil films like Paranjit is doing and Mari Selvaraj is doing. They are exploring that new solidarity between the colonial power and the Dalit. How they needed each other at one point in order to destroy the hegemony of upper caste. But of course, the colonial power have different motives, and the Dalit has different motives. But even having said that, but they found themselves being in the same in the same race against thing. And even at the point, the historian Jacques Weber is saying something interesting. Jacques Weber is saying actually the French did converted, did that pronunciation to take revenge on the upper caste Hindus. So by creating kind of disbalance in the society, so giving more power to the Dalit, so then the upper caste don't have, and which really happened in Pondicherry, because at one point the converted and the Renaissance were so powerful, and that it kind of created a disbalance in the society. And once they became French, it didn't mean their condition has changed either, because in order, okay, you became Christian first, you became Christian, so you thought you will escape untouchability, but it didn't happen. It took like 200 years to fight against the system. So when they became Renaissance, they said, okay, now we have Renaissance. It's very interesting. In what do you call, when they became French citizen, they thought, okay, we are equal to the French people, so they started to wear slippers. In 1848, there was a huge agitation in Pondicherry, because all the pariahs suddenly they were wearing slippers and they were walking the streets, and that enraged the upper caste. So they went to Kurchukupam, where I come from, when the book is happening, the Thinnai is happening, and they killed hundreds of Dalits, and they burned their house. And the Dalit couldn't wear the slippers, but it took a long time again to wear the slippers. So just to tell you how difficult it was for them to fight, thinking they had acquired a certain rights to live as equal citizen under the French rule, but again and again, the upper caste, upper caste in Pondicherry, they were against the certain equality. So when it comes to education, schools, the first school was opened by de Basson de Richemont. Let me find that. In 1826. 1826, the first school opens in Pondicherry, but the school was only for Europeans, not even for the Topas, what they call Topas. Topas are the Creole people. So it was not even for the Creole people. It was only for the Europeans. And it took another 30, 40, 50 years that Debassin de Richemont has decided to open the first Pariah school for the Pariah. So education entered the Pariah community, and interestingly, already in 1820, can you imagine? 1820, there was already 3 doctors, 5 school teachers, and peons and police officers from the Dalit community. So in the course of such a short time, the evolution which was given to these people, they grabbed the chance of becoming equal, and having 3 doctors in 1820 is such a big thing. So all this makes that the Dalit understood the power of education, the power of being a French citizen, not anymore being part of the Hindu rigid society. And so this created a big disbalance in the society, and more upper caste were against that the Dalit are getting more and more power. So every time that the Dalit makes one step ahead, there was like someone to push them back. So it was so on and on. And I'm gonna read another passage of the book where uh, after all this happened, the kind of awakening which is happening in the Dalit community. Katanan, when they were young, Katanan and my father had been seduced by the self-respect movement and threw themselves in the struggle of the rights of Dravidians. Armed with Tamil literature, they battled Brahmanism. Until my father left for France, Katanan and he were ardent members of the Dravida Karagam and the Periyar that Periyar had founded. They shared his dream of a society without religion or caste. Animated by the fire of youth, exalted by the ideals of the party, the two friends went from one meeting to another, reading Ayoti Das and listening to Periyar. The protest in front of the temple that refused access to pariahs. They helped intercaste couples to wed and widows to remarry. My father left for France with sadness and hope. He was sad that he would not continue the struggle for his country's emancipation, but hopeful that the caste system, the social apartheid, would disappear. He was soon disillusioned. Not only did Periyar party split, but the new parties that emerged from it, Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam and Anna Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, were led by clowns and con artists who replaced the idols of Brahmanism with the worship of themselves. So it shows the after getting those education from the French system, the amount of awakening, as Ambedkar said, educate, agitate, and organize. So they were organized themselves in such a way how our education and our how we became prosperous could also benefit the other community. So the first world, after the first, when during the First World War, most of the people who went for the First World War were Dalit, and when they came back, they didn't just say and taking their pension and just relaxing. They understood the power of being gone to fight for the French people as a French citizen and coming proudly as French citizen and organizing themselves. So while doing that, the first move they did is to open a place called the Réveil Social, which is still existing in La Porte Street. Réveil Social means the social awakening. The social awakening was started by Mr. Noël, Mr. Lazare, and Mr. François Lecel, Clairon brothers. So a bunch of people who came back from the First World War, and they studied the social awakening, which is a place where they're having classes, evening classes, writing, where they could write applications for people who cannot write and educate. So they were organizing themselves and to agitate. In organizing by some, what I'm saying is they managed to destroy those walls in the church. And one of the person, Subrahman, he even went to an extent to destroy that wall which was existing in the cemetery. And when you see have you been to Pondicherry, Suraj?
Yes, I've
you've
been, yeah.
Yeah. So in the beach road, yeah, there is that monument of the soldat inconnu for in a commemoration for the war, people who died in the war.
Okay.
For many years, even for centuries, people are thinking, okay, this was put by French people. But who instigated that is Mr. Babylon, who was a Dalit. He is the one who wrote to the French government saying you need to erect a monument to commemorate the people who died, because who died here is the Dalit people who died. So very few people know that the Monument aux Morts, what they call it, the Cour Chabrol, was instigation of Mr. Babylon, who was a Dalit. And Mr. Babylon went to an extent, he had a library with Dalit literature already at that time. So these people, not only they were there to educate and to also to organize, they also to understand the power of being present in the city, because you should know that most of the people who became French, Dalit, they were not from the colonial city, which is the Fort Boulevard of Pondicherry, which I call the colonial city, which is actually it is. But outside the boulevard are people coming from there. It's almost called cherries. What is a cherry? Is a paracherry, right? So people who became French, they were from the paracherry. They were not inside the four boulevards. But when they became French, when they went to fight for the First World War, they came back with money. The first thing they did is to invest into land and properties, in how to take position into that colonial city, to show that I can also live inside the four boulevards. So that changes a lot in the urban landscape, because Pondicherry as a colonial, if you look at the colonial, the Pondicherry urban landscape, each and every streets, are based on caste. The house I have now, but okay, thank God, my family has several houses in Pondicherry. But the family house, it's on Vaishal Street. Vaishal Street was called Komuti Street before. Komutis are Chettiars from Telugu, right? So next to that, there is Chetty Street. After that, there is it is called Aurobindo Street now, but that was called Mudaliar Street. And after that, there is Perumal Koil Street. So all these streets are named, and if you go on that side, close to the South Boulevard, there is a Velaja Street. There's I say it in Tamil, then I can translate into English, but it remains small Brahmins, big Brahmins. So, so all these streets are caste based. And when these Dalits, French Dalits, they went abroad, fight for the First World War, Second World War, they come back with money. They don't want to go and live in the paracheries. They want to live inside the boulevard. And to live inside the boulevard, of course, you need money, but they had the money. And that time, that is a time just after the independence, or even a little bit before the independence. People didn't have that much of, they were not as rich as now, the new, what you call upper middle class or middle class, whatever you can call. So it was easy for them to buy properties financially, but not on caste basis, because I still remember in 1980s when we bought this house, it was not easy, because in Komuti Street, it was only Komutis who were living and some people from the Arabind ashram. And when they knew that we were Dalit, nobody wanted to give us the house to buy, even though they were empty.
Wow.
They were for sales. So if you're a Dalit, you can't buy inside Pondicherry. So in that way, it was not difficult, but again and again, they fought. And that's close to what it was called, the Velager community. More and more who live there is only Dalit. And where there's as I said, the Parade church, most of the people who are living there are Dalit, but they are money. These people have money. They bought 2-3 houses. As I said, my family has more than 10-15 houses already inside the Pondicherry, and a lot of lands outside Pondicherry. So for them, it was important to have lands and property to show that they can also be equal to any other person. So these are the benefits that the French Dalit got from the French colonial power and even the French education and by just being French, as simple as that. And by doing that, another aspect one should not neglect. Not only the Dalit community uh, were instigating people to study, they were also instigating to have physical prudeness. So means all the sports club are existing in Pondicherry, they all started from Dalit. It's not
Oh,
only
really?
it's not only education which was important. It's also the Dalit body. The Dalit body is as important as the Dalit brain. So the Cercle Sportif de Pondicherry, which is on the southern part of Pondicherry, was started by Dalit. So there is Étoile du Matin, there's La Pléiade. So there are all these sports association, were started by Dalit in order to show that we can also compete physically. We're not, because we always have that idea of the what do you call the weak Indian. He's eating only sambar and rasam, and his his body cannot be as powerful as any other person. So the Dalit body is also very very important. And interestingly, I remember as a young boy when we used to go to all these weightlifting clubs, to uh,
Mhm.
there were only Dalits and Creole people. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so all the bodybuilders, they were either from the Dalit community or from the Creole community. You don't see any other community being a bodybuilders. So that shows also how they were interested into show that the Dalit body is as beautiful as any other body. So, and on a personal note, uh, there is this game called pétanque, which is very very French. Pétanque is these iron balls that they play in south of France, Marseille, and those areas, and it's a very popular in France. So pétanque was played in Pondicherry, of course, for centuries when the French people were there, but it was played only by French people, but white French people. The Indians were not allowed to play. And just before, after they left Pondicherry, there was a vacuum of who is going to play pétanque. So who took over the pétanque game is again the Dalit. And my father was the best player in Pondicherry. And now, yeah, but that time it was only played by the French, Franco-Indian military people who went to the French army. But now that generation is slowly fading, and who has taken over that entire game is the entire Dalit people. Now, during the French people, the colonial time, there was only two, three association who were playing the games. But now, you will not believe me, there's 80 teams in Pondicherry playing pétanque. And who are playing pétanque? They are the Dalit. So it's interesting the shift of that French identity as created in order to show the Dalit community how they could come out of this rigid caste system, and also how to fight back by organizing, organizing, and agitating. And still have some time. Okay, I will just end with a last note, which no, two more notes, which I love the most is another passage of pronunciation and then the cuisine. But this part I'm going to read out is, as people have noticed, my first book is the Dalit humor, because while I try to write the Tinai, I don't want to write again and again a book of lamentation. I don't want to write, oh, me, we poor Dalit, we have suffered this and that. I wanted to show the joy of being a Dalit. the joy of the happiness, how we can be witty, how we were playing around our identity and just being the Dalit humor. And so this is again Dalit humor. I think you will enjoy this. This is my third book, Nocturne Pandéché, which has been just translated into English. I'm coming to Delhi to launch the book in a week time. So this is about again another person. We're going to the renunciation process. A few months later, all of Pondicherry would recall Ejumalai's act of renunciation. The village cock lost his feathers when Ejumalai left his village early, scared that the cock would wake up the entourage and that his neighbors would reach the town hall before him. Ejumalai tried to catch it before he crowded. But the sly bird escaped from his hand and ran down the alley like a headless chicken, crying out stridently in a cloud of feathers. The entire village woke up. When he reached the town hall, surrounded by an unruly crowd, Ejumalai was in a strident mood. He would have liked to be the first one to renounce in the village. All the way from Ujavarkare to the town, he was taken aback by question he didn't know how to answer. The renunciation. Apart from the new elite of Villara, the rest of the population had no idea what this meant. Some thought that from then onwards, they would have the same right as white people and that they could dress like them. Others pretended that they would become French citizens, leave their country, and go to France. A fair amount of people started talking about this among themselves. When his turn came, Ejumalai looked at the government employee high-headedly as if the latter was the fool of the village. Name, asked the employee without looking at him. Ejumalai. Profession, none. Caste, Mudaliar. The employee frowned without looking at Ejumalai. Have you chosen a name? Yes, fenêtre. Fenêtre means window. Fenêtre? What? The employee lifted his head up for the first time. He looked straight at the averagely tall man who was well dressed. His hair was well brushed. His shirt and immaculately white vesti was a class apart from the other candidates. Compared to most of the aspirants before him, a certain assurance emanated from this individual who was standing confidently. The employee put his pen down on the table and looked at him straight in the eye. And may I know why fenêtre? Why not terrace, pilier, or chambre? He asked teasingly. Why not? Pour ne tomber pile choose la porte, he said defiantly. Oh, yes, I understand now. Punutambe Pillai had a reason for choosing this name. What is yours? I don't have an. I don't think that should be a reason for renunciation. The employee looked like amused and broke the familiarity. He took on a serious air and started looking at his files again. No, I can't accept this. Choose another name and hurry up. There are other people waiting. Ejumalai lost his confidence and seemed disappointed. Not knowing what to do, he turns towards his companions who couldn't understand what was going on. They could do nothing to help. As he turned, his gaze fell upon a portrait hanging on the wall. He looked at the picture and asked, "Who is this?" Surprised by the question, the employee turned mechanically towards the wall. "Oh, that is Napoleon, the emperor." His hesitant voice expected to burst. "Give me that name, Emperor Napoleon." He turned sideways and, like the emperor, put his right hand on his abdomen. 2 minutes later, it was on the footpath on the barracks of the sepoy, the back of his vesti marked by the footprint of the employee. The mission civilisatrice was unfolding in an alarming way. So,
What a beautiful.
that shows the amount of Dalit humor I put in my literature just to show that we can make a fool of ourselves. And
correct.
I will just end with the last note again with what I like the most is the Dalit cuisine. One could not, the French cuisine, the French Pondicherry cuisine, or the French Creole cuisine, or the French cuisine as it what we call it now. One cannot think of French cuisine without the contribution of Dalit cooks, because who went to cook for them? It was the Dalit. And this is the last thing I would read, and then I hand it over to you. The two houses next to our house were inhabited by two cooks. In one lived Brito, who worked for a teacher at the Collège Français, his wife Marie Magdalene, and his mother. In the other lived Salvanada's father, who worked for the vice consul, vice consul, and his wife and three daughters, Amala, Kamala, and Vimala. They were both excellent cooks, as long as they weren't in the grip of drink. Salvanada's father had missed his true vocation as a magician. He could have made anything disappear and reappear in a new form. His sleight of hand displayed itself whenever his steps stumbles toward the Athelian fields, where cats become rabbits and parakeets become quail. When he was under the influence of drink, he could quarrel with his honorable employer and leave his place of work as the astonished guest stared on. Brito, in contrast, was a sneak who hid his roguery with kindly smiles. He also had a knack for making the dishes he cooked disappear. But unlike Salvanada's father, he didn't have a knack for making the dish reappear in a new guise. Especially was theft. In his wily hands, 2 kilos of pork vindaloo could be thinned down to 1, with the rest evaporating in a tin he hid in the folds of his kaili to take back to his home. The art of theft was matched with the art of confabulation. A botched biryani would find a new identity, becoming a mysterious dish that only he knew how to prepare.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
One cannot think about Pondicherry cuisine without the contribution of Dalit cooks. So to end my presentation, there was even at one point in 1773, Lord de Lauriston has had a paella company, a fusilier company consisting only of pareas. So there was a battalion, paella battalion, in the French Sipahi, because there was a paella battalion started by Lord de Lauriston, because they understood that by making the pareas as French citizens, they would show not only loyalty, but they also will be rallying with them in order to destroy the caste structure society. So this is one of the reasons that still the French Dalit community, the Francodalitalité communities, are still loyal to the French people. And I understand at a certain point that because they escaped the caste system, they don't want to be seen as Dalit anymore. They want to be seen as only French, which is at one point understandable. But as a writer, it's my duty to reclaim my Dalitality, is to show that, okay, I'm French, but I'm also Dalit. But before becoming a French, I'm a Dalit. And not only I'm a Dalit, I'm a Negro Dalit, as my cycle of poems say, Negro Dalitalité, because I'm also Black. Thank you.
That is incredible. Thank you so much, Ari. You gave a lot to chew on, and also in a way put people like me to shame that we have rarely, if at all, looked at the French part. I mean, because of the obsession with the Anglo part of the world, what you did is beautiful. You have exposed us to so many vignettes and commanding, pioneering stories, not just posts and education. I think this has to be reinvented for the Dalit history, because if 1820 we have the doctors and educated people, it challenges the narrative, because oftentimes the British colonial graph of story gets complicated because the formal colonization, so to speak, the Queen's proclamation, that simultaneously happens as with the indenture labor in different parts of the world, and so does the formal crown ruling over India is happening mid-19th century, after mid-19th century, where especially the French history, is the making of 17th century, and it's no accident. 18th century earlier, Abbe Dubois, one of the missionaries, writes a book treatise exposing caste system, and so I think that part is such important, such rich. One of the things you said is, there are mass murders simply because you want to wear a footwear. It reminded me, not exactly so, the black people, especially the black in America who had Black Wall Street, they were mass murdered because they had now gained access to capital and were establishing an independence from the dependence of white capital. And they were, of course, massacred and mass murdered. But here, film, the reason of wearing footwear gets, and even today, we keep reading reports from Tamil parts that still you have to remove your footwear as you walk from the landlord or the dominant caste people. What kind of gets complicated in the sense is the Frenchness that becomes a precursor. And I think it's not unique to Dalits, it's to almost every other groups. In a sense, that seems like the Dalits probably were the liberals who got assimilated without complaint. And compared to Algerians or other colonial counterparts, because of their own history, the Dalits here seem to be not having problem and maintaining the uniqueness of being French. Nothing to do with Dalits, more so the geographical identity. And that's why geographizing identity has created a narrative of empty traumas, because geography is complex. There are so many people. There is Mudaliar, there is Velala, there is Paraya, there are so many. There's also French. And so when we do that, I am an XYZ citizen. It really removes. And so, Ari, what you're trying to do is to reclaim your own past, kind of makes the trauma a story of filled bucket. It's not empty. Doesn't mean geographizing identity is evacuating trauma from one place to another, but it just doesn't necessarily necessitate. You say India got colonized, and then you ask the question, did the Banias, who were having the equal partnership in dealing with business, if not equal, a relatable partnership, they colonized because businesses were growing? The question is wrong. And so what, Ari, you talked about, and I would like to invite you and also people here to comment and ask questions to Ari, what time we have, is the Paraya Battalion. Now, I did not know. What year was it?
The Paraya Battalion, it was exactly in November 1773.
Now, you see, this is way before... Sorry, continue.
Yeah. In November 1773, Jean-Claude de Lauriston, the French military commandant, then governor of Pondicherry, created a fusilier company wholly consisting of Paraya Christians.
Now, you see, we talked Dr. Ambedkar. That's very recent history, what he's doing. In fact, he's not even doing anything new when you look at the French, I don't know if it was Republic yet, but the French colony, the French Empire, expanding and getting, any good colonel will have idea that I need more army. How do I recruit? And then you go about it. So the question for you, Ari, is there's so much complexity of nationality, especially colonial power. How do we connect to it? There is complexity, there is critique, rightfully so, of the colonial structure, its complicity, the colonial structure, especially South Africa. They created this. There were tribal identities, but it formalized caste. Also in India, it was formalized in the sense of governance model by colonial written and so forth. So there is complicity in Rwanda, where I'm right now.
Absolutely.
So how does the Dalit story complicate that narrative of anti-colonial viewpoint in your view?
It's a very interesting question, Suraj, because during the entire period of, mainly after the Second World War, the First World War, when Dalit people went to fight for the French in the First World War, they were still very French because there was no what do you call the independence movements were not as big as in India that time. In 1914, 1918, independence movements in India also awake a certain idea of being Indian. So again, it becomes very complex because you are French at one point as a citizen, but you are ethnically Indian, right?
Correct.
So when Mahatma Gandhi came to Pondicherry, that one of the reasons when the awakening was happening, who invited Mahatma Gandhi to Pondicherry? It was the Arijan Mahasangh Sevak Sangh. You see, so those people who are the Arijan Sevak Sangh, who are these people? They are the French Dalits. So at one point they were the situation. I understand that's kind of what I call the shifting identities. Shifting identities at one point you are French and one point you are Indian. So the shifting identities make. So where do we give our loyalty to? Are we
very good?
Are we giving our loyalty to France because France has given all this new what do you call powers, or are you giving to India because India is our country? So there is one segment of the Dalit community who are fighting against the colonial power. I can take the example of Monsieur Clemenceau, very interesting name, Clemenceau. Clemenceau he went to the French Second World War, and he came because he was wounded. He came back and he understood the France he was dreaming of was not the French he experienced. So when he came back, he understood I'm not French anymore. I'm an Indian. So he went against the French colonial system, and he fought very early, and he was a communist. He was a staunch communist with Subbaya. So he went and fought against the French government. And another interesting figure we need to bring here, the first chief minister of Pondicherry after the French left, Monsieur Edouard Goubert. Edouard Goubert is a Creole. He comes very aristocrat, white Creole family. But Edouard Goubert was born out of relation with a white aristocrat person and a Dalit woman.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So I'm coining you a new word in front of you. It's a Francodalitalité.
Yeah.
So he was half Creole, half Dalit, and for the entire his political career, he wanted the French to stay. And at one point, when he understood that the colonial, the independence struggle was gaining more and more ground, and there was no point that the colonial power has to stay in India, be it in British colonial power or French colonial power. But Edouard Goubert's story is something different, but I don't want to go in there because it's very complicated and
great
large to go in that. At one point, he changed side, and he becomes Indian. He's no more French. He becomes Indian, and he fights for the Indian independence, and then he wins the Indian independence. The French leaves, and interestingly, what Edouard Goubert does, he becomes the first chief minister of Pondicherry, and it changes caste. He becomes Edouard Pillai. Goubert Pillai, pardon. Sorry.
Oh.
He's no more Dalit. He doesn't want to rule Pondicherry as a Creole Dalit. He wants to be an upper caste Vallara. So he becomes Goubert Pillai. So these are the shifting identities I'm talking about. So it is very complex. It's very difficult. There's another guy called Léon Saint-Jean from Caracal, also fought against the colonial power, the colonial system. So there was a segment of people who fought against the colonial system because they understood, okay, they don't want to show gratitude towards the French people. Okay, I became French. We are equal, but it doesn't mean I need to show you my gratitude for the rest of my life. And my stand as a person, as a writer, is the same thing. My father generation never questioned or never been critical against the French colonial system. Me as a writer, I'm questioning that, but it doesn't mean that I'm showing gratitude towards the colonial system. I am French, but I can be critical against the French colonial system. And by reclaiming my Dalitalité, that also show I want to have another identity, just being a French.
That is brilliant, and I think you also in a way, because there is always a necessity in the anti-colonial, decolonial struggle to identify loyalties with a history that is being made, done and undone simultaneously. And I think the decolonial project is undoing of some of that and fixing it. But also in that process, sometimes we come to a phase where colonial power structure doesn't seem like the way we are used to because of the layers of history. And your kind of story is educating me, many of us here, also to look at what the Lusophone part of the Dalit story will be. And I think this is fascinating. What you are doing is you are really putting the essential centrality to how Dalits operated in this Francophone world. I have like two more points, two questions here. I have a point that I will address towards the end. But I think what you're suggesting is that identities are shifting in a way that invites us much more complicated debate because if we talk about India, was India the India we see today, 1947? It was not. It was an independent conglomeration. It was few ruling satraps, ruling elites who dominated, controlled massive plots of land. So whose loyalty? Is it the loyalty to your native king who is anyway going to oppress you? Or is it to the modern state? Because modern state didn't really exist until the formal economy came into picture. So I think you're opening up many kind of things. Anthony Gomes has a question who is asking about the Francodalitalité. It could be a neologism, but why use the suffix, which is ALITA? Anthony thinks it makes him think of mentality, indianité, marginality, or simply identity. I wish to know your thought process in this matter. Basically, the suffix, the dalitality, ality, why that?
I mean, to be honest, that is too technical for me or too academic, into going into the thing. Me as a poet, I go towards my musicality. For me, it sounds more musical. That's what I choose, Dalitalité. And so I don't know. But I understand Anthony's question. But when I'm a creative writer, I don't put too much of weight on is this right, is this wrong. I just go according to,
of course,
as I said again, the musicality of words. And mainly when you create a neologism, you don't go saying if it's grammatically right or vocabulary right. You just go according to your intuition and the musicality which is behind that. And mainly as a poet, that's what I do. So sorry, Anthony, I'm not able to answer in a more scholarly way.
No, we can take a crack at it. Especially, it's interesting that the discipline of philosophy tries to dock the expressions in a creative form. Music is one of them. Whereas I think creative writing is co-partnering or subsuming to or submitting to the music. So I think that kind of is explained. The lethality is also, a friend Ananya here as well. She wrote a commentary on exploring this kind of dimensions of creolization as well. Somewhere briefly, I also write about it, and we're trying to develop this kind of new form. But you will read more in a substantive form, Anthony, later next year, hopefully. There is an anonymous speaker who has really asked another.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
An anonymous attendee has asked a question comparing La Réunion with Mauritius, right? The French existence of the kind of colony of Indian Ocean doesn't seem to have as entrance caste-based inequalities as it seems in France. And the question: do you think that French and British colonial powers had different approaches and impact on the elite? I think this is a good question. Like French and British colonial powers, what were their impact? Yeah. What was their impact? Or do you think they had different approaches to the Dalit question, the kind of identity, and so forth?
A different approach and impact on. Yes, absolutely. I think the main difference, I would say, is again the mission civilisatrice that the French had compared to the British, because British, they were only focused on mainly on business. To be honest, they were not interested to civilize the barbarians and to bring to bring education to people. They were interested how to I'm going to loot this country, and I'm good at that. So I'm going to create some kind of infrastructures, and I'm going to create an elite who are going to rule the country, because they can't bring everyone down to India. So I'm going to create an elite to create who are going to rule the country for me, and that's it. But the French, but there are two reasons for that, because the French and the British, they fought very many wars in India, and one of the last war which happened when the French lost the war, the British, there was a treaty which said that the French should not anymore have any more army in India. So the French has lost the military power and being the military presence in India. So after Dupleix and Bussy, they couldn't fight against the British people. So the only reason I think I forgot the name of that intellectual, but it'll come back to me. The only way to stay in India is through education and mission civilization and the kind of intellectual or cultural approach. So that's one of the reasons that you still see Vanakam France or Bonjour India, whatever. The French present through culture and art, they are more present than the British, because the French invested a lot in terms of anthology, what they call all the institutions, research institution, l'École de l'Extrême-Orient, which is in Pondicherry, the Institut Français, which is again studying Indology. So they went into more intellectual kind of hegemony over the Indians than the British, because I don't think there is any trace of British institutions in India, but compared to the French people. So their approach was different because of very ground realities, because the French couldn't face anymore the British, on a military basis. They shifted, and they went more into more education, mission civilisatrice, and integration, more assimilation, I would say. And in the process of assimilation, the Dalit project was part of that assimilation. How to empower an oppressed people in order to show that they have succeeded on the mission civilisatrice.
Very interesting. I think the whole idea of
please.
Sorry, I would say it's a very interesting approach, Ari, that the British regime needed more elite bureaucrats to run the country. British bureaucracy was one of the most effective colonial instrument of colonial governance. And what you say is the French, the whole idea of Frenchness post revolution of assimilation really created much more space, kind of a cushion for these identities, which really makes it a kind of a comparable example, especially for Dalits of the 19th century and then the First World War, 20th century, like your father and so forth. Final question, because there is another question. I'll try to see if I can club it. It's with Treaty of Bundy Wash, something Maya was trying to probably mention. So the final question, and I would invite your brief comment on this, Ari. A is about your own Malagasy origin. We'll talk about it at some other point, but also, you could maybe help us think about what the Nehru that fits into your making of Dalitness. And it made me think, the French people, I assume they were white, who were looked up as pariahs, as you say. At some point, French people were equal to pariahs. So I was wondering if you ever thought of what was the caste background of this white French people, because I think whiteness is still an identity that's yet to be done, right? There's no singularity of whiteness. It's aristocracy, it's noble class, it's the bloodline. Bloodline essentially is descent. Descent means caste. So this is essentially a formalized form of caste. And Nico talks about it, where the peasants from France who were toiling, the lower castes, were picked up and put into the French army to give them a French no, and for them, France meant nothing because they were still being toiled as peasants. They had to pay taxes to the crown and so forth. But when the colonial government was being formed, they were sent to Algeria, and now they were shooting another peasants because the obsession of national identity, called a geographizing identity, makes it kind of a very porous space where you are like, okay, I am now this and this. And similarly, the French, for example, on the assimilation, we're getting pariahs inside and making you are a French and you can then do it. I think it was a very clever strategy for a colonial government, which helped France and also Dalits, but the Dalits lost their quote unquote Dalit identity. So the question is, have you ever thought of that French kind of background kind of people? Does that feature, was that kind of a conversation at all? It's just an open question.
Absolutely, Suraj. That's a very interesting thing that you're asking, because one has to understand the Compagnie des Indes, which was a company created by merchants, right? It was divided by it was a company started by Richelieu, who was the financial minister of Louis XIV, Louis XIV, right? So Louis XIV has the main share power in Compagnie des Indes. And the rest was so when you see merchants are already at that time, they were already an elite, right? They were not the peasants. So they were not just simple people who were part of the Compagnie des Indes. And the Compagnie des Indes was run like a mafia. So there was one group of people who were running the Compagnie des Indes, which was the people who came to India, be it Chandanagar, be it Yano, Mahe, and so Surat, and on. But again, who were coming to Pondicherry, who were coming to India, is people from the same family. So it was a kind of elite families who were appointed as governors, who were appointed as in the high positions, I would say. So there were very small portion of people who came to India as to rule, because they believed that to use the local to administrate and to rule the colonies. So they were not compared to Réunion, Mauritius, or Caraïbes, or Martinique or Guadeloupe. They used to send the people who were what they call the planters. So they were like peasants. They used to go and work the land in agriculture fields and sugarcane plantations. They used to work, of course, and then before the slavery I'm talking. And then one became more industrial, they brought the slaves. But before, it was the white people who went to work. They went to work as slaves themselves, from Portugal, from Spain, and from southern of France. And so that was not the case in India, because in India, the colonizers were from a very elite group. So there is no type of, as you rightly said, like in Algeria, like a peasant was sent and go and kill the Arabs or the Algerians. So that's one of the reasons it is still very a virgin space. The history of the French presence in India, it's still not known. It's still under studies, and very few, more and more people are studying now. But only the last 30 or 40 years, people are interested in the French presence of India. And one of the reasons my books are successful, because it's to be honest, I'll tell you one thing, Suraj. This is the first time in 300 years, my friend Ian Magadera and Kate Marsh has made a repertoire. They went through the list of 3 centuries of French literature written in India, about India and India. And you won't believe me, there's no one single Indian, not one single Indian. They were all white people writing about us. There are some people who wrote before, but they were more like scientific books, like about laws, about medicine. Maria Dasu is one good example. Monsieur Anusami, which is still existing, is another reason. I'm the first novelist. I'm saying novelist. I'm not a writer. As a novelist, I'm the first novelist of Indian Pondicherry origin writing in French. And it happened to be I'm a Dalit. So I'm not going to give away my story of Dalitalité saying I'm going to write about colonial novels. I'm going to write Dalit novels.
Very, very good. Thank you so much, Ari. I now hand over to Prasanna to offer his closure, concluding remarks, and also share updates. We have the next speaker, who is Thomas Piketty. He is going to deliver Anand Tiltumde Distinguished Lecture on Political Economy. The link for that is here, but I will leave. Please look up, sign up, share. Over to you, Prasanna.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, Ari, for such an interesting peek into yet another chapter of Dalits in India, specifically with what happens with under the French colonies. I think your talk at least gave me a peek into a similar pattern that can be seen throughout the histories of Dalits, whether it is about the condition in which they are living in, the idea to get out of that situation, seeing into the aspect that helped in certain ways as education, the idea to go and get power in terms of properties, lands, finding this social awakening, and trying to figure out the following the idea of educating, agitating, and organizing is what helps. And also, it tells about there are multiple aspects to a human, and Dalits are no exception, whether it comes to their Dalit humans or Dalit cuisines. These are the aspects that decide and drive humans in totality. So thank you for that talk. As Suraj mentioned, we talk coming up on September 19th. We have shared the link in the chat, so please sign up. I have also shared the link to Ari's website and to specifically to the section of books and his works. Please go over, take a look, share some love, and I end this talk for today. Thank you everyone for joining. You have a good day, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you, Suraj. Jai Bhim.
Thank you, Ari. David. Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.